Hello, and welcome to Through the Veil, where we get together to share stories and remember the wisdom that has always belonged to us. I'm Melissa Camrudin, and this week Alice is joining me to share her two birth stories. The first, a perfect birth center water birth, the one everyone dreams about, but one that left her feeling relieved that it was over and wanting for more. And the second, a transcendent sovereign birth. Enjoy. Hi, Alice. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for coming to share your story today. I think you'll share or like how we got connected and I actually haven't heard your birth story. So,
I'm excited to share it because so it's been about 18 months since the birth of my daughter. And you know how in the beginning, a lot of people ask you, and then sort of a year go by and I'm like, I haven't told my story or even thought about it for a while now. And looking back, I think we process it in a different way. So I feel really excited to share it now,
yes.
sort of looking back.
Yeah, a little more digested.
Yeah. And I'm sure it'll change, sort of like if I retell it like 3 years
Yes.
later. So that's sort of the beauty of telling birth stories too.
Yeah, as you evolve, right? Your perception of like what went, like the facts of what went
Yeah.
down change. Yeah, I kind of
Yeah.
love that part. I love the
Yeah.
retelling.
hmm
Yes. So tell us how does your mothering journey start?
So I have two children. Um, One I gave birth 7 years ago, and then my daughter. So my first with my son, um, and maybe I'll share a little bit of my background so people know sort of where I'm coming from. So I grew up in a very traditional Asian immigrant family background. So that means a lot of emphasis on knowing the facts, sort of following, mainstream path, and um, and also looking up for experts to help me make the best decisions. And so I started there with my first pregnancy. However, I do also want to add that I am a, a clinical nutritionist. I studied holistic nutrition, and I'm also now a certified yoga teacher. So, despite my background being very like driven for what we consider success, I also had always this pull towards, well, there's got to be something more than this mechanical world. So for my first birth, I wanted to get the best midwife because I wanted a natural birth, but I also wanted to do it in the hands of an expert to be taken care of and guided to have this like beautiful natural birth. And I started, and this, I was living in Toronto at the time. And so um, I chose a midwife because there's a university in Toronto that has a really good, um, very well reputed midwifery program. So I was able to get a midwife who was a faculty at the university, and um, and then she recommended like Ina May Gaskin's book on the birth stories. So I had this like romanticized vision of, okay, I'm going to have this natural birth, but okay, I'm not going to make birth plans because we don't know what's going to happen. And, but there was a student on the team that I had said yes to. And this student was almost finished her degree, almost finished her practicum, and was extremely eager. So I didn't, like, being first pregnancy, I didn't really know much, and I sort of trusted my midwife. And I should mention, like, in Toronto, there's usually a team of 3 midwives, and then 2 will show up at your birth. Um, but mostly I just worked with that main midwife that I described, and then the student. And because the student was very eager, and because this midwife was very experienced, she was more laid back, very, very trusting of the student, and closer. And I had the holistic nutrition knowledge, so I had said no to a few things, like, for example, like the vitamin K. I wanted like the oral one that I was more comfortable with, and I said only if there's like trauma during birth. So there was more intention behind some of the choices, but still kind of hoping for a natural home birth. Yeah. And then I was at 40 weeks pregnancy, and then the students started getting a little bit anxious. 41 weeks, 42 weeks, and then, everyone is anxious.
Yeah.
Including my mom, who flew to Toronto to be there for my postpartum. She flew at 37 weeks. And then at this point, she's like there for 5 weeks, like waiting for this baby to come. And she had very traumatic births. So a lot of her fear was sort of being passed on to me. And same with this midwife student, who was also getting quite anxious. And I think it's okay that people have fears around the risk. But I think what was beginning to be a problem at that point was now I was holding space for their fear.
Yeah.
That sort of takes you away from holding, from being held in whatever journey that I was going through. I was doing a lot of affirmations at that point to kind of trust the process and trust that the baby will arrive when he is ready. But I was now at that point doing daily ultrasounds, and getting a score out of 5. Am I allowed to continue? And then 42 weeks and 6 days, my 42 weeks, 4 days, the midwife student was calling me at night, like, do you want to go to the hospital tonight? I can meet you there. Very much, it almost felt like harassment. I remember crying a lot at this point every day, like, oh my God, do I have to have a hospital birth? And then calling the midwife, saying like, oh, the student is telling me this, like, can I just wait one more day? Like, asking her permission. And then 42 weeks, 6 days, I went again for my ultrasound, and then went to go meet the midwife. And they were also doing like the stretch and sweep every day.
Oh man.
I know. Looking back, it feels very like, what was I thinking? But at that time, I felt grounded, but also I felt like I needed to calm these people down.
You take care of them.
Yeah. It really felt that way. But it's also not in my nature to be like, back off. I think that sort of came later, being a mom and not being afraid to stand up for your child. But at that time, I wasn't there yet. I hadn't crossed
Yeah,
that.
that's the gift of motherhood.
Yeah. So I was still like as a maiden, I think being quite naive and being allowing, people to take that space. And then they ended up so at the 6-day mark, they suggested with the stretch and sweep that they try to break my water. And then we would be able to see if there's meconium. If there is meconium, then we would go to the hospital. And if there isn't, then we can sort of just wait. And when we break the water, usually that will help bring the baby. And at this point,
crazy.
I should also add, like, we were doing the spicy food. I had done the castor oil. Like, I had done
wow.
all the things to try and not go to the hospital. Right. And I think this is what I was like, I thought this is what I had to do. I didn't even think about the option of saying no. And I also like looked into getting a doula to help me. But the doulas that I found at the time, sort of just Googling, not really through word of mouth, but just from Googling, they were like birth doulas that you pay and then they just show up at your birth. And that sort of felt strange to me, that there wouldn't be this like relationship building. There would be like one meeting via phone or something beforehand, but then, really the work is them showing up at your birth. And that didn't feel comfortable for me. So I just trusted this midwife. And anyway, and I remember they broke the water. And again, it was the student breaking, like, okay, like, you can try. And then the midwife is watching her, and she tried for like almost 10 minutes to break my water and couldn't do it. So then the midwife ended up just getting it right away. And then they told me to walk around, but nothing was happening. There was no water coming out, even though she had broke the membrane. So she said, okay, why don't you go home, and then maybe something will happen. So then I got in the car with my husband, and we were driving home, and we went over a speed bump, and then my water came out.
Baby's head popped up. The cork moved.
And then as soon as we got home, my contractions started. So then calling the midwife, they were like, oh, how frequent are the contractions? But they were coming very strongly, very frequently. And all of this I learned later, that like when you break the water, like it's going to accelerate things quite quickly. So that was around 3:00. And then we had the option of giving birth at the birthing center, and there was availability. And we lived in a very small apartment downtown, so with a cat and a dog. So they were like okay with us coming to the birthing center, or the birth center. And then we went there by about like 4:00, and baby came around 8 or 9, between then. So everything happened extremely fast.
Yeah.
When I got to the birth center, they were preparing like the tub. So I got into the tub right away. My husband was there. We were in the tub together. And the water was really comfortable. Like I was sort of riding the contractions from my apartment to the car, and then there. And then as soon as I got into the water, I remember feeling very soothed. And then, and I remember they were checking, like I wanted the lights dimmed and stuff. And the birth center is very peaceful. Like it's got a fireplace, and it just looks like a very high-end hotel room. So I was quite comfortable there. And it was again the student, and then the experienced midwife. And then they technically have to have 2 midwives there. So another midwife was there, but one of their client was in another room giving birth. So they were kind of going back and forth between two rooms, and the student was mainly with me. And then I think now, like, a lot of this is also like, I don't really remember how long had passed. But I remember sort of finding a restful state after after like what felt like a long time of contractions. And I was kind of going in and out of sleep in the tub. And then they were like, oh no, like you're fully dilated, so you need to start pushing. And I was very like comfortable, and I just
Like you
didn't
didn't
want
feel
to
like pushing.
Yeah, I didn't feel like pushing. I just wanted to stay in the tub and enjoy this break from the contractions. But I was told I had to get out. Like, nothing is happening. So then they got me out, and I remember immediately feeling this pain in my low back when I got out of the water. And then I was moved from the tub to a birthing stool to the bed, telling me to like try squatting, try kneeling, try laying down, and just push and push and push. And I was like trying to push like as if I'm going to pee myself or poo. Like I was pushing in that kind of sensation, but nothing really was happening. And I remember like after about an hour, and this is like my husband telling me like I was pushing for about an hour. And then I was like, why isn't the baby here? I'm so exhausted and so uncomfortable. And they were like, oh, they're not supposed to, like, it's not supposed to be a quick thing. And I was like, okay, like, and every time, like, nothing, I would get really uncomfortable in a position. They would be like, okay, well, let's try this. And then they would move me. Anyway, finally, they were like, they saw the head. And then the student at this point was doing a lot of stretch and sweep to try and get the baby out.
Oh my.
And I remember sort of like trying to slap her hand away because it was so uncomfortable and really painful. And I really didn't want her to continuously stretch me. But that's sort of what it felt like. She kept stretching and, you know, putting her hand around the baby's head and my body. And finally, I ended up giving birth on my back. And I just remember feeling so relieved that it's over. And my husband was crying and holding the baby. The midwife student had caught the baby. And, you know, they do their thing, like wipe down the baby, putting a towel around the baby, and handed the baby over to my husband, who was crying and holding him and being like, oh, you did it. And I remember just laying there like, oh my God, thank God this is over. Like, that was so hard. It was so hard. And then later I had learned that I had teared. So the student stitched me. And my midwife wasn't really there. She was very hands off, and kind of letting the student take control. And I didn't know this before, but apparently at the birth center, like, there's a limit of like, you have to be out in 2 hours after the baby's born.
Oh.
So I was like immediately like had to like shower, put on that huge diaper, and be put on a wheelchair to the car. And then we got home. And my mother was also because she was traumatized by her birth, she didn't want to even hear me and my sounds. So she was waiting at home with like seaweed soup.
Nice.
And Yeah, and then I remember sort of taking a break there, and we were struggling. I remember with like putting the baby in the car seat and just realizing how small this baby is,
Hmm.
in that huge car seat, even though it's meant for infants. And yeah, we got home and it was like around 10:30, and everything just happened very quickly. And it took me a while to process my first birth, but I remember feeling like I thought, when I read the birth stories in Ina May Gaskin's book, like a lot of those felt like they were in power.
Hmm.
And I didn't feel like I was in power in my first birth. I had a natural birth, right? I didn't use any medication. There was no interventions per se, even though
Hmm.
now that I look back, like the stretch and sweep and the breaking of the water, like that was very invasive.
Yeah.
um,
It was very disturbed, right? Like I think,
yeah,
yeah.
and it was very like, oh, I need this. I
Mhm.
need this to help my baby come. Um,
Like your body didn't do it. The midwife did
mhm.
it when she broke your water and then with her
Yeah,
hands
and
on
and
your
then
vulva.
yeah,
Like,
and she stretched me, and then she pulled my baby out, like,
oh.
and and I and I think, so when I was pregnant the second time, I had an you know and I remember, like, whenever I would meet moms and they had a traumatic birth at the hospital, I would be like relieved that that
Hmm.
wasn't me. But I'm like, but I still knew deeply that there has to be a better way. Like that can't be what these beautiful stories are
Hmm.
describing. So for my second birth, I asked around in a community that I really trusted and felt aligned, about getting a doula. And that's when you and I met,
Hmm.
right? Not physically, but not in person, but you had suggested a birth keeper, and I had my first meeting with that birth keeper, and I also met with a couple other doulas as well to try and see who I'm aligned with, because I felt like I needed more support to get the birth that I wanted. And so, when I met this birth keeper that you had recommended, she was the first person ever in 6 years to validate my experience in my first birth.
Hmm.
Um, because it was very subtle, like everyone on paper sort of saw this like natural birth at the birth center, healthy baby, like, oh my God, you're so lucky. Like, you have, like, that's what everyone wants. Like, you didn't have to, whereas
Hmm.
this birth keeper really understood why I felt powerless in my birth and why I wanted something different. And because I had just moved to Vancouver, also, I didn't really realize how competitive it is to find a midwife. So
Hmm.
it took me a while to find one. Um, and also, I was a little bit more picky this time to find one that really aligned. I was very determined to say no to any students.
Hmm.
um, but it was hard. It would not only was it hard to find a midwife, but it was hard to find a midwife that supported home birth, which was very different from my experience in Toronto.
I wonder if that was because were you birthing in like 2021? No,
In
2020.
20 At the end of 2022.
Yeah. And it seemed like in 2020, like everything took a turn, right? For
Mm,
and changed. And I know in 2020, 2021, there were midwifery groups not offering home birth because they didn't want to come into
mm,
people's homes. And then it seems like some of them just kept that because in
yeah.
BC, midwives are supposed to offer choice unless they work in an integrative practice where they work with GPs. I believe like they need to offer you, like, you need to have the option of your home or your hospital birth, but that seems to have disappeared for some of them.
Yeah, I never really understood why.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand, like, the time during the pandemic really permanently changed things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we'll never go back to the way
Yeah.
it used to be. But I remember in Ontario, at least my experience and what other moms describing was, midwives don't get a lot of respect in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't like going to the hospital. Like, they want to do home births. And in mine specifically, like, there was a birth class done um, by a doula, and they sort of pitch the home birth to you to help you consider that, because midwives just don't have the time to spend that much
Mm-hmm.
time with each client explaining the pros and cons. Anyway, so I eventually found one, um, and had a couple phone meetings, but for our in-person meeting, when I think it just never came up, but in the in-person meeting, I still had to, like, answer the questions before going into the building.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
do you have the symptoms and whatever? And um, and at that point, they realized that wasn't that I didn't have my shots, like my COVID
Mm-hmm.
shots, and that I wasn't going to wear a mask in our meeting. And then they really didn't like that and refused. Well, they didn't refuse. They refused at first, and then they changed their mind to provide me care. So then I was like, okay, well, this is not going to work. And then I switched to another midwifery team. Yeah, which also ended up not working out. They they were very not okay with, like, my choices around what they were offering, like the vitamin K, or like the use of, like, oxytocin if we end up in the hospital. There were a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of things that they wanted to go over with me, and I think it was um, they ended up discontinuing care with me at 36 weeks. And
Wow.
yeah, and her exact words were that I lost her trust.
Hmm.
And I remember saying, like, oh, I thought you were supposed to gain my trust.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
literally what I said to her. And she said, no, it's both ways. And I think she was afraid that during the actual birth, in the case of, like, risk, that I would refuse certain things that they were not comfortable with me refusing.
You know, that's like ultimately not a belief in choice, like in choice at
Mm-hmm.
all, because really, like, it's not hard to support people in choice when you agree with them, when they do what you tell them to do, right? Like, that's not
Yeah,
supporting choice. Supporting choice is when you can offer someone an informed consent conversation and they can decline what you would take and you're okay with that,
yeah,
because that's choice. Otherwise it's
exactly.
not.
Yeah. And we see that not just in the birth world, but just in the
Hmm.
world in general. Like, I respect freedom of speech until you start saying things that I disagree with.
Right,
Then
and
I
that's
don't support
hard.
it anymore, right?
It
Like,
is.
so yeah, yeah. Um, there's, like, a famous saying, by Voltaire. I think it's something like, I I re- I don't. It's something like, I don't like you disagreeing with me, but I will fight to the end of my life on your freedom to disagree with me, or something like that.
Hmm.
And I think in reality, it's really hard to find people who will still protect and honor those freedoms: freedom of informed choice, freedom of consent, um, all of those things, even when they disagree with you. It's really hard to find people who honor
Yes.
that fundamental principle.
Yeah, that takes quite a level of maturity, right? Where you don't position yourself as the savior over the victims, the savior over the people who don't get it. Like if you'd have to see that person as an intelligent equal. You'd have to trust that she's a wise woman with a wise body who knows, and it might not be what you choose, and that she's a grown ass woman and she can make that choice herself.
But even if they didn't, I think, like, there are parents who I'm like, oh, they shouldn't be feeding that to their kids, or showing that violent program to their kids or whatever. But it's like, at the end of the day, they are a free person to, and I, as long as I believe in that freedom and want that freedom to be given to me, I need to be okay with that being done to anyone. So
Yeah.
at 36 weeks, I was sort of left without a midwife. And I think there was still a part of me that was trying to hold space for other people's fears, because my husband wasn't comfortable with the idea of free birthing. But it was actually him that after one of my visits with the midwife, I remember what it was. So she said, she's okay with home birth, but every adult in my home would have to wear a mask, because as soon as she enters my home, the home becomes a medical setting. And I was like, I'm not okay with my husband wearing a mask while I give birth. And like, I was like, why is my home being turned into a medical setting? Like, that's the reason why I want a home birth. And my husband just like said to me, like, I think this is a sign that, like, there isn't a midwife that is going to honor this process. And he suggested maybe we should just do this on our own, which was like very shocking for me, because in the very beginning, when we had discussed this idea, he was like, no. He was like, I'm not comfortable with that. Like, what if something happens? Like, and I was sort of tending to that as much as I was tending to my own fears. But when that refusal of care came from the midwife, I took it sort of as a sign to, I think we were meant to do this on our own, and I'm ready to do this on my own. There's like absolutely no regret. And one of the ways I make decisions, like hard decisions where like you can't really make it with a pros and cons list, is I ask myself if I'm okay with the worst case scenario, kind of going through this path. And I was okay with the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario being like my baby wouldn't make it alive. And I know that that's really maybe bad to say, but there's sort of risk through any path,
Yes.
with childbirth. And whether or not I go to the hospital or do it at home, like, there's always inherent risk of the soul deciding to leave the body and not crossing over. And I think that's just beyond our control, no matter what choice we make. And I was okay with that, choosing to do it on our own, and my husband too. So then, and I knew this baby was gonna also take time, because from my first pregnancy, my body just takes longer to grow babies. When my son was born, almost at 43 weeks, he was 8 pounds. So really, really small. He would have been so small if he was born at 40 weeks, right? So I knew she would go over the the quote unquote due date. And she came at 42 weeks and 5 days, just on her own. And it was close to Christmas time. And I also wonder, like, if it was also my body, because it was end of year. My son was finishing his school for the year, and there was a lot of performances and Christmas parties and sort of this stuff. And she decided to come on Monday after all of that was over and his school had ended. And I remember we put him for like a week of camp, and around like 4 o'clock, he ends at 4:30, and around 4 o'clock my contractions started, and my husband was like panicking, like, because he had to go pick up my son and the baby was coming. So yeah, my husband went to go pick up my son, came home, and immediately like started blowing up the pool that we had ready. And then the birth keeper was on her way, and I was sort of like dancing in the beginning. I remember being like super thrilled, like, oh, she's coming on her own, I didn't have to do anything. There was a little celebration and reassurance that everything was going to be okay, because so much of anxiety around the first time was just waiting for him to come and doing everything we can to make him come. And this time we did nothing, and
came anyway.
And she was ready. She was like, yep, I'm coming now. And the birth keeper brought the TENS machine, so I was using that laying on my bed. And I did tell her, like, I really want to give birth in the water if I could. And my husband came to check up on me a few times, but I was mainly laying in the bed by myself in our bedroom. And I think they could hear me. So I think by the sound, they knew how much deeper I was going. I really like Whapio's description about the holistic stages of birthing. That really, really transformed my confidence and faith, because it also brought insight into that little pause during my first birth when everything sort of stopped.
Yes.
He was churning, and the midwives were just like, you got to get going. Go push. And when I listened to that like over 10 times. I listened to, there's a podcast, Birthful, where she describes the holistic stages of birthing over like 2 episodes. They're like an hour each. And I listened to that over 10 times previously. Just, I loved her analogy of like going through the veil, which is the name of your podcast, and climbing that mountain. And it's just, I'm getting so emotional like talking about it again. But and then so I was mainly by myself, sort of entering through the other world, right, deepening my state of consciousness. And then the birth keeper came and asked if I wanted to move to the pool, because she said, and this is what she said, if you wait a little bit longer, then you might not be able to move all the way there, which was like in the living room. So I said, okay, yeah, like, and then so my husband and her, they helped me move to the pool, and then I was sort of nearing the end of like the contractions in the pool, feeling so good, like so good. I think by that time the TENS machine was at its like highest intensity. And the warm pool just felt so good. And I remember kissing my husband, sort of like I was holding on to his arm and kissing him a lot and sort of holding on, but also just like trying to soothe. I don't know what I was doing, but it felt really nice. And he was kind of holding me outside the pool this time. and then I could feel her come down. This was sort of the magic that I never really got to experience. And I could feel her come down and then go back up. And so I was pushing when she was coming down, and there was nobody was talking, nobody was telling me to do anything. I was just in it with her. And it's like, oh, okay, like we're pushing now, like I'm gonna push to help you come down. And we were sort of doing this dance. And then I birthed her on my side, and I caught her arm and she floated up, and I saw her like super squished face, and I was kissing her all over. Yeah. My son was, he woke up when I had just arrived at the pool and doing my last bit of the contractions. He had woken up from my sound, and but he had gone to his bedroom to sort of wait there. And I don't know if that was the birth keeper or my husband guiding him in that, because I was so in it. And then I remember when she was very close, I remember telling my husband, go get him, because I wanted him to see. So he was there. And it's really funny because I had a GoPro set up in the pool, and we had another camera set up outside, and I wanted to film her emerging, and they were both on around the same time as when my son had arrived. And I knew she was really close, but both cameras turned off and never recorded the emergence, which I wonder, maybe it wasn't meant to be recorded. But my son witnessed it, and my husband was there. And yeah, I remember like just pulling her out of the water and holding her, and it was very different than like, oh, I'm so glad it's over. It was like, you're here. And I was just so like immersed in the joy of meeting her. And this feeling like we did it together. It wasn't
the dance. I love how you said that.
Yeah. And just like we did it. It wasn't managed or controlled, or like I was completely in my power, and so was she. So I felt like we crossed this rite of passage together. Yeah. So I'm really grateful for that experience. And after she had arrived, before I gave birth to the placenta, which was like a good like half an hour, 40 minutes, I was told, no one said anything. It was like completely quiet, including my 6-year-old son. Like just admiring. And then when she latched, and then she fed, and then after she had done her first feeding, my son asked if he could come in to the pool and hold her. So he came in, he went and put on his swimsuit.
Oh, so cute.
And then came into the pool, and then just held her. And then later he fed me some raw milk we had while my husband was holding her at this point. And then we had and then we moved into the bed after I had showered.
At what point did you, was the birth of the placenta?
It was about 40 minutes, like after my son had come and yeah. So after she arrived, and then she fed, and then my son came in, and then he wanted to go out because there was a lot of blood in the pool at this point. And then I was like, oh yeah, like I want to get this placenta out. So then it came, the second sort of mini birth of that, and then we had and then my husband took the baby, put the placenta in a bowl, and then I went and showered, and then we moved into the bed together, and then had a little cord burning ceremony.
Nice.
And then the birth keeper and my husband sort of took care of the mess while I laid there with the baby and my other baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How is postpartum for you?
So there's another, I can't help but to compare the two.
Of course, yeah.
I didn't have my mom this time, but I had a lot of food that I had prepared, and it was really nice. My husband was also like seasoned at this point to take care of, more people. But I had teared again at the same spot, which I hear is common because your scar tissue is weaker. But the first time, the student had stitched me, but she didn't line up the perineum correctly.
Yeah.
So it was like very uncomfortable and not right. And so and it wasn't actually going back. So I think she maybe didn't stitch it close enough or something. So on the third day, so after 2 days had passed, I needed to be restitched. And it was such a painful experience because they had to take the stitches out, sort of tear it again where it started, and then restitched me without anything, like without any anesthesia or anything.
Whoa.
So it was just so painful. And it took me a long time to even like look in that area, touch, because I just remembered this pain after this obsessive stretching from the and then the stitching. But this time I sort of just let it heal on its own, and it was totally fine.
Did you do anything? Like, was there any consciousness around the healing, or did it just kind of happen?
I didn't put anything, no. Like use anything, you mean? No, I wasn't. I was drinking a lot of bone broth, and eating like in Korean culture, we eat a lot of like pork hock, like pig feet, which has a lot of collagen and yeah, but nothing topical. And yeah.
Do you feel like it healed better this time?
It feels better. I don't know how do you yeah, I don't have any like fear around touching it or anything like that. Also, like preparing for this birth, there was just a lot more this, I don't know how appropriate this is, and you can cut this out later if you if you want, but the birth keeper had advised that I want to be very comfortable with pain, but like good pain, safe pain. So my husband and I, we were like, he was touching me a lot, and in areas that, and applying pressure in a way that typically would sort of make me contract and not like. for example, like he was pushing and putting a lot of pressure like toward the front around the pubic bone area, which typically wasn't like, and it would immediately sort of make me contract. And what she was saying was that when you feel that sensation and you contract, the body will then retract from the progress of birth. So she advised kind of like getting pelvic floor therapy, like physiotherapy, a lot of that. And it very quickly turned into this like a fun thing that my husband and I were doing, where we were exploring my body together. And I was learning to breathe into any areas of discomfort. And I think that really made a difference in this, like as a prep work, to being comfortable to trust the process of like, okay, this is painful, but this is good pain. I am safe. This pain isn't going to hurt me, and being with that. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like perineal massage, but partnered. Yeah. And then how, so with this birth, you didn't have midwives and attendants. How did the birth registration go?
It took a few months of like going back and forth, proving my birth. They, yeah, but in the end, it wasn't a problem. They, like, I had my baby checked by a chiropractor, on not the night that she arrived, but the next day. And so I got a signature, a witness, like affidavit from her, and they wanted a real doctor or a medical attendant to be a witness.
Really?
Yeah. So then there was a
like
little
to see
bit.
your baby.
And
I haven't heard that one. It's like different for everybody. It's funny
because
what
it's
they
like
ask for.
a friend or like someone in your circle, and then a professional. So then I had the chiropractor provide that professional letter or whatever. But they, but I was like, I didn't have one. Like, what do you want me to do? And even though I had like, I was like, I can send you a photo.
I feel like I have a birth video. And they're like, please, like, nope, doesn't count. Those can be doctored. That's your like, okay.
It was very strange going back and forth that process. But yeah, I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. I always wonder, everybody has a little bit of a different story of registering an unattended birth. And I know that's something that makes people anxious. Like really when I was, for the last baby, when I was registering for midwives, I was pretty much like, I don't want to do that paperwork. And ended up not having midwives. And it's fine. Like it's actually, it's okay.
I think it's only a problem like if you want to fly out of your country like the day after your birth, but
which would be hard anyway. I know who would do that. It takes a bit of time to get your birth certificate anyway. It's just like there's a bit more documentation than what midwives have to fill out, and you're just providing some evidence that you were pregnant and that you planned for a baby, and then that it came and it's most likely yours, and some people agree with you. Oh, thanks for sharing your story. Tell us how, what sort of offerings do you have out in the world right now that people can connect with you through?
So I do see clients for my clinical nutrition work. So people with metabolic health challenges, a lot of like autoimmune allergy stuff I see people for, and all sorts of any kind of health imbalance, I would say. I see people one-on-one, and a lot of my focus is on like education. and helping people be their own health experts.
Yeah.
I also, when people think of nutritionists, they think of like meal plans and recipes,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a little bit deeper than that. We work with like different food groups, but also like different preparation of food and how that changes the effect on your body. For example, like raw versus cooked, fermented, because not all food is the same. Like not all dairy is the same, not all wheat is the same, not all meats are the same. And sort of thinking about drawing on a lot of like earth-based wisdom, I would say, to heal people's relationship with food as well.
Mm.
And then I also teach yoga and meditation. I run prenatal yoga classes, public drop-in classes, private group classes. And so they can find me at nourishonearth.com or on Instagram, nourish.on.earth. But yeah.
All right. Well, I'll put those in the show notes so people can easily find those. And thanks so much for sharing your story.
No worries. I don't know if I went into too much detail, but I hope
I love the detail.
I
We're
hope
leaving
it was very, very empowering, because honestly, like it's wisdom that everyone have
Yeah.
in our DNA. And I don't like the word subconscious, because it's like not sub, but it's our
Yeah.
intuitive mind.
Yes.
It's our that we just need, I think, to be woken up to access that.
Yeah. And it's like, I think we always have access to it. It's hard when there's
Mhm.
so much like busyness going on in your consciousness, like in your frontal
Mhm.
lobes to get there. But birth, you get there, right?
Yeah.
Like all those hormones, like the depth that it takes to like you said, climb the mountain and secure the soul of your baby and be the safe passage to this
Yeah.
place. You get there. You get
And
there
it's
for
meant
sure.
to make you feel like you're breaking down so you can break through.
Yeah. It takes absolutely everything.
Mhm.
Yeah, but no more than that.
Yeah.
Like it won't be too much. Yeah, it's so beautiful. Those stories are so empowering, and I appreciate your story like in so many ways, but especially in the like that you had the like the dream, air
Yeah.
quotes, home birth, and how that can be like, but that's not quite it. It's not just not entering a hospital and having
Yeah.
your baby in water. Like that
Mhm.
could be part of it, but that's not quite it. It's
Mhm.
that birthing in your own power, from power within, like
Yeah.
not power over, power within. And like being undisturbed, being in your
Mhm.
comfortable space.
And
In
that
your
looks different for everyone. Like
yeah.
I know people who like don't see anyone during their pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Like my husband has like a stethoscope.
Mm-hmm.
He also bought
Stethoscope.
like a Doppler from Amazon.
Mm.
Like he wanted to hear the baby. Like we weren't like, oh yeah, like not monitor at all. Like we
Mm-hmm.
were still like, I was measuring my blood pressure, and
Mm-hmm.
we were still doing that. But just because we're like, it's not about those things. It's about what is that you're called to do, and what does it look like for your family.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, do you feel, like you said, in your own power,
Yes.
tapping into that deep intuitive wisdom to step into that calling
Yeah.
and stepping through the veil, and all of it, just the magic.
Yes, it's so true. Like for some people, maybe those things would interfere with their intuition,
Yeah.
and for some people, it won't. For some
Yeah.
people, like it's fun, enhances it, it's comforting, whatever
Mhm.
it is, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So like your birth and power, like my birth and
Mhm.
power might not look like your birth and power. And but we're
Exactly.
gonna arrive at
Exactly. Yeah.
that same place.
My good friend had a birth in the hospital. She there was nothing used, but she birthed in the hospital completely relaxed. She felt so taken care of. The baby was born, didn't cry, completely at peace. And she was like, yeah, I had that was amazing. Like, I want to do that again. And it's like, at the end, we just need to honor that experience. You know, that to me is the goal. And I think that's why I felt so transformed and grateful for my second birth. So I love that you're sharing birth stories, because it emphasizes this idea that it looks very different for everyone.
Yeah, I think, like, just to expand our knowledge or knowing of what normal can look like what normal births can be, even that, like, the big pause probably for your first birth before you would have felt like pushing, that's normal too, right? Won't happen to everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then that power you find in your birth, that intuitive knowing, like, once you've accessed that, I think, like we were saying earlier, like, that's the gift of motherhood that you take in, when you can just know what your children need, and you can, like, find the quiet space in yourself where the wisdom lies and access that. And that's where, like, the deep mothering and knowing happens, the gift that you carry to carry your children through.
Yeah, so true. Thank you so much for holding space for me to just tell my story. That was really fun.
It was really fun.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I got so emotional throughout at different points, but thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Thanks for listening. You can check out birth.throughtheveil for some birth pictures of Alice, and actually for birth pictures of all of the episodes that are posted so far. Check out the show notes for ways to connect with Alice, along with links to the podcast she mentions on the holistic stages of birth, and a link to submit your own story. New episodes come out every Tuesday. You can follow, share, rate, and review this podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Be part of the movement toward more powerful and peaceful births.